Mike used to think money worked in a pretty simple way. More money, better life. That was basically it. If $1,000 felt good, then $10,000 must feel 10 times better. And $100,000? Mike couldn't even imagine it. $1 million? That was a different universe, the kind of number people talked about in podcasts or typed into retirement calculators before closing the tab and going back to work. Mike assumed every milestone would feel the same, just bigger, but years later. After crossing some of those numbers himself, he realized something strange. His first $1,000 didn't feel anything like his first $10,000. And $100,000? That changed something completely different. Because money doesn't just get bigger. At certain points, it starts solving different problems. The first $1,000 gives you protection. The first $10,000 gives you time. The first $100,000 gives you momentum. And $1 million, that gives you something Mike never expected. Control. But Mike didn't understand any of that when he was staring at a flat tire on a Tuesday morning. Mike was already late for work, which somehow made the flat tire feel personal. He stood in the parking lot, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, staring at the tire. Of course, that was all he said, because this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. A broken phone, a medical bill, a car repair. Mike had started to believe life had a strange ability to wait until his bank account was almost empty before breaking something. He called the repair shop. A few hours later, he got the number, $380. Mike's stomach tightened automatically. It was an old reaction, before he even thought about the money. His brain was already running through the options. Credit card? Maybe. Move the phone bill? Could probably wait. Pay less toward the other card this month? Again? Then Mike remembered something. He opened his banking app, scrolled past his checking account, and tapped on a separate savings account. $1,047. Mike stared at it. For months, that money had felt almost useless. He'd slowly built it. $50 here, $100 there, once. He'd almost spent it on a new television. Another time, on a weekend trip. But he hadn't. And now, standing outside a repair shop, Mike finally understood what the money was for. He paid the $380. And yes, it hurt. Anyone who tells you spending $380 on a tire feels good is lying. Mike hated watching the balance fall, but something was missing. Panic. There was no panic, no credit card balance following him into next month. No rearranging bills, no lying awake calculating numbers in his head. Just an annoying Tuesday. That evening, Mike told Jake what happened. I lost almost $400 today. Jake looked at him. Did you? Mike frowned. Yes. The tire cost $380. I know. So, Jake took a sip of coffee. Did the repair put you into debt? No. Did you miss rent? No. Are you going to spend the next 4 months paying interest on a tire? Mike paused. No. Jake smiled. Then maybe you didn't lose $380. Maybe you spent $380 to keep a bad day from becoming a bad year. Mike looked at him. That sounded dramatic. But it was also true. The first $1,000 hadn't made Mike feel wealthy. Not even close. He still checked menu prices. He still waited for sales. He still knew exactly when payday was. But he was slightly harder to knock over. And sometimes, that's the first thing money changes. Not your lifestyle, your ability to take a hit. The first $1,000 doesn't make you rich. It makes you harder to break. A few years later, Mike was sitting at his desk when his manager sent him a message. Can you come into my office? Mike knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew. There was a woman from Human Resources sitting in the room, a folder on the table. His manager wouldn't quite look at him. The company was restructuring. His position had been eliminated. They appreciated everything he'd done. None of this reflected his performance. Mike heard every word, and somehow, almost none of them. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in his car. A cardboard box was on the passenger seat. Laptop charger, coffee mug, a small plant he'd forgotten to water for weeks. Mike put both hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. He'd lost his job. For a few seconds, the old panic returned. Rent, insurance, groceries, car payment. The numbers started lining up in his head. Then Mike opened his phone. His savings account had a little over $10,000. Mike did something he'd never done before. He opened the calculator. His basic monthly expenses were around $2,700. He divided the numbers, then stared at the answer. It wasn't forever, not even close, but it was months. Mike had months. That realization changed the entire afternoon. He still felt terrible. Losing a job doesn't become fun because you have savings. Mike was embarrassed, angry, a little scared, but he wasn't desperate. And desperation, Mike was beginning to understand, was expensive. 2 weeks later, Mike received a job offer. The salary was lower than his old job. The commute was worse. And during the interview, his future manager had proudly said, "We're really like a family here." Mike had learned to be suspicious of that sentence. The old Mike would have accepted immediately. He would have told himself, "A job is a job. You can't be picky. Take the paycheck, figure it out later." Mike stared at the offer email, then looked at his savings account and clicked decline. His hand actually shook a little. 3 weeks later, he found another job, better salary, shorter commute, a manager who didn't describe the office as a family. Mike called Jake. "I think my savings just made me money." Jake laughed. "What do you mean?" "If I had taken the first job," Mike explained the salary difference. Jake listened, then said something Mike remembered for years. "Your $10,000 didn't buy you a car. It didn't buy you a watch. It didn't make you look rich. It bought you enough time to make a better decision." Mike went quiet. At $1,000, a bad day couldn't destroy him. But at $10,000, he could survive a bad season. That was different. The money wasn't just protecting Mike anymore. It was giving him room. Room to think, room to wait, room to say, "No." And Mike was starting to realize no was one of the most expensive words in the world, because without money, sometimes you can't afford to say it. The first $10,000 doesn't make you free, but for the first time, it gives you a little time. Mike remembered when his investment account made $11 in a month. He'd checked it 3 times. $11 a month. He'd actually laughed. "This is what everyone's excited about?" Jake told him to be patient. Mike hated that answer, because be patient is what people say when they don't have a more exciting answer. Still, Mike kept investing. Nothing crazy. A percentage of every paycheck, sometimes more, sometimes less. There were months when life got expensive, and Mike barely invested anything. There were months when he received a bonus and invested most of it. He wasn't perfect, he just kept going. $18,000, $31,000, $47,000. Then the market fell. Mike watched $47,000 become $41,000. That was a terrible week. He called Jake. "I've lost $6,000. Did you sell?" "No." "Then you own the same investments you owned last week." "Jake?" "Yeah, that's not helping." Jake laughed. But Mike didn't sell. Months passed. then years. One evening, Mike opened his investment account. $101,438. He stared at it, then closed the app, then opened it again. Still there. $100,000. Mike expected to feel different. Maybe he'd stand taller. Maybe the apartment would somehow look smaller. Maybe he'd finally understand all those people online who use the phrase, net worth journey. Instead, Mike made dinner. He went to work the next morning. Nothing happened. Until a few months later. The market had been doing well. Mike checked his account, then checked the performance for the year. He frowned. The account had grown by more than Mike had personally invested that year. Mike pulled up the numbers. Checked again. Same answer. He called Jake. I think something is wrong. That's usually a good start to a phone call. My account grew more than I put into it. Okay. No, you don't understand. Mike read the numbers. I worked all year to invest this amount, and the money just... He paused. Made more money? Jake laughed. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. Mike sat quietly. For years, Mike had been carrying his financial life. Every dollar saved came from him. Every investment came from a paycheck. Every increase in his account was mostly because Mike had put more money in. It felt like pushing a heavy cart uphill. If Mike stopped pushing, nothing happened. But somewhere around $100,000, Mike noticed the cart moving. Not by itself, not every year, and definitely not in a straight line, but enough to notice. A normal percentage move on $1,000 was almost invisible. The same percentage move on $100,000 could be thousands of dollars. For the first time, Mike could hear his money working. Jake put it differently. The first $100,000 is when money stops whispering. Mike smiled and starts talking. Sometimes, Jake shrugged. Sometimes it screams and loses 10%. Mike laughed. Fair point. $100,000 didn't make Mike financially free. He still needed his job. He still had bills. The market could still fall. But something had changed. Mike was no longer building alone. His money had finally become a noticeable part of the team. The first $100,000 gives you momentum, and momentum feels completely different. From protection or time, Mike had imagined $1 million many times, usually while sitting in traffic. In Mike's imagination, millionaire Mike lived near the ocean. For some reason, there was always a very expensive car involved, and millionaire Mike never answered emails. Reality was less cinematic. When Mike's net worth finally crossed $1 million, he was eating leftover pasta, standing in his kitchen, wearing old sweatpants. He checked the number. $1,003,000. Mike stared, then refreshed the page. $1,002,700. Well, he said to himself, that was quick. Mike laughed and put his phone down. He didn't quit his job the next morning. He didn't buy a car. He didn't call everyone he knew. In fact, for a while, nothing changed. Then one Thursday, Mike's manager walked over to his desk. We need everyone here this weekend. Mike looked up. This weekend? Yeah, big deadline. Mike already had plans. Nothing dramatic. His sister was visiting. They hadn't seen each other in almost a year. Old Mike knew exactly what he would have done. Cancel, apologize, go to work, be annoyed, say nothing. Mike looked at his manager. I can't this weekend. His manager paused. We really need everyone. I understand. Mike felt his heart beating faster. I'm still not available. There was an awkward silence. Then, his manager nodded. Okay, and walked away. Mike sat there. That was it. No dramatic speech. No quitting scene. No applause. Just no. But Mike thought about that moment for the rest of the day. The $1 million hadn't bought him a mansion. It hadn't bought him a private jet. It had changed the weight of the conversation. Mike still liked his job. He still wanted his paycheck. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew something. If everything went wrong, he would probably be okay. Not forever, not without consequences. But he had options, and options changed the way Mike moved through the world. He negotiated differently. He worried differently. He made decisions differently, not because he had stopped caring, but because fear was no longer sitting in every meeting with him. Later, Mike told Jake about the weekend conversation. Jake smiled. "So this is what $1 million feels like?" Mike asked. Jake thought for a moment. "No? What?" $1 million probably feels different to everyone." Mike waited. "But I think you finally understand what money can buy." Mike raised an eyebrow. $1 million buys the word no." Jake laughed. "Sometimes." Then he became serious. "People think money is valuable because of what it lets you buy. A better car, a bigger house, nicer vacations. And those things are fine. But eventually, money becomes valuable because of what you don't have to tolerate." Mike looked at him. "The job you can't leave, the emergency you can't afford, the decision you have to make because rent is due Friday." Jake paused. "Money doesn't give you control over everything, but enough of it can give you more control over yourself." Mike nodded slowly. That was the difference. The first $1,000 protected him. The first $10,000 gave him time. The first $100,000 created momentum. And the first $1,000,000 gave him options. Control. Not complete freedom. Not a perfect life. Just more ability to decide. Years earlier, Mike thought every financial milestone was basically the same. More zeros. More stuff. A better version of the life he already had. But he was wrong. Every zero had solved a different problem. $1,000 made a bad Tuesday just a bad Tuesday. $10,000 gave Mike enough time to avoid a desperate decision. $100,000 showed him what happened when money finally became large enough to help carry the weight. And $1 million, it gave Mike something he'd spent most of his life without realizing he wanted. Options. The ability to stay or leave, to say yes or no, to make a decision without fear making it first. Mike looked back at all four numbers: $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, for years. He had looked at people further ahead and felt behind. But now he understood something. Someone building their first $1,000 isn't failing because they don't have $100,000. They're solving a different problem. And maybe that's why comparing financial lives feels so terrible. You're looking at someone else's answer to a problem you haven't reached yet. So don't look at someone else's million and convince yourself your first 1,000 doesn't matter. It does. Maybe more than you think, because every zero changes something. The question is, which problem are you trying to solve right now? If this story made you think differently about money, subscribe, because Mike still has a lot to learn, and maybe so do the rest of us.